It's here, but it's not there. There we go. Fantastic. Hi. So apologies for my voice. I have been a victim of one of these, the flu. I am just getting over it, but it is a little bit crackly. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the data set that I run, hopefully just let you know that it exists, because a lot of people don't know, and possibly to ask for some help with it as well. So I'm going to be talking about how can deaths lead to safer prescribing, and what data do we use and how can we achieve this, and it's via hopefully being able to influence the drug policy from the lessons learned from the people that have died to then lead to safer prescribing. So informing and evaluating drug policy is one of the key aims of what is known as the National Programme on Substance Use Mortality, which is a database of deaths following drug use that is reported to by coroners from England, Wales and Northern Ireland. It was started in 1997, so we're at a near 30-year longitudinal data set now, and we have over 60,000 individual case reports of people who have died. Now this is from any psychoactive drug, so this is both medicines and illicit substances as well. You might not have heard of the NP-SUM. It was originally called the NP-SAD. I didn't particularly like the word SAD in it, and also used the term substance abuse deaths, which, again, a bit of a stigmatizing word, so we got rid of that quite recently. But the chap who ran it died suddenly of a heart attack in 2012, and I literally stumbled across it in 2017. It was going to be shut because nobody was using it. It all stems from me not being a person called Colin. If you find me at the tea break, I'll explain that a little bit further. I'm originally an in vivo electrophysiologist and fluorescent microscopist, and when I learned of this data set and it was going to shut, I thought, this can't happen. Like, this is too much data. These are real people's lives, and this can make a real difference going forward. When I took it on, coroners were still posting physical paper copies of these death reports to us via the post that we were having to hand enter into the database. Utter madness. I've now introduced coroners to something called email. Incredible. Some do still try to post to us, which is very frustrating. So I am not an epidemiologist. In training, I am trying my best. If there's anyone here who might have an interest in the data side, the data handling, how we can better open this up to other people to use this data, that's what I want. I am not a dragon that sits on this data set, hoarding it for myself. It's just that people don't know that it's here, and I just want people to use it. We don't charge for the data for academic research purposes either. So I'm going to hopefully try and show you what we have been able to achieve with what I would describe, I do sort of epidemiology in boxing gloves, and what I really need is someone that can help finally play it like a piano. Do come find me if you can help out. So the other thing that we do with the NP-SUM is we horizon scan for emerging substances on the illicit drug market, things like nitazines, you might have heard of, synthetic opioids, xylazine, nasty, nasty things. And we also try and inform public health policy as well. But today I'm going to focus on some of the drug policy aspects that we've worked on. So that is looking at the impact of changes to methadone dispensing during the pandemic, and then also the increase in gabapentinoid and opioid co-prescribing. So looking at this methadone one first, for those of you who don't know what methadone is, I imagine the majority of you do, but it's an opioid substitution therapy for people with opioid dependence. So we try and get them off the heroin and then onto this longer acting opioid. And the majority of people who go on to a methadone prescription go on to what's called daily supervised consumption. So they have to go to the pharmacy and they have their 30 mils or their 80 mils. It's dyed green, so when they've drunk it, the pharmacist can see that their teeth are green, they've actually swallowed it, and they've not sort of kept it in a pocket for later to sort of hoard or sell. But during the pandemic, it was decided that this wasn't very safe for people who have compromised immune systems to be traveling on public transport, interacting with other people, to go to pharmacies that might not even be open if the pharmacists got sick through COVID. So it was decided that it was safer to give them 2-week take-home dispensions of methadone. Now, daily supervised consumption was introduced in the early 2000s, because when methadone was first prescribed, it was as take-home doses. Methadone deaths skyrocketed. Daily supervised consumption introduced, methadone deaths went down. What do we possibly think happened when we went back to take-home? So we published this paper a couple of years ago now, and we did it fairly, well, in terms of coroner data, quickly, believe it or not, a whole year after the pandemic, well, I suppose a whole year. So we extracted this data in November 2021, and we could only look at the first sort of 3 months of the pandemic, March through July, and that's because coroners take, on average, 13 months to conclude a death at inquest. So from when the death happened to when it's actually reported, it takes that long. It's massively slow. That's a big problem, so we did it as quickly as we could, and what we saw, we looked at deaths following methadone use in the preceding 4 years, and then that's what happened in 2020. The big sort of rear of the head there is what happened. Now, this is with data that was extracted, as I said, November 2021. Just looking at March through June 2020, we had the Freedom Day on the 4th of July, if you remember that, when we could go and hug people again. But we recently redid this analysis with data that was reported by August of this year, and this is actually what happened. So once we'd actually got even more data from that period, that what looked already like a bad spike was even worse. When you plot this then with the preceding years, what we've seen is this step change. So previously we had this baseline in deaths around about sort of 30, 35-ish a month happening, and after COVID it went up in that spike, but then it stayed at around 55, 60-ish deaths. And when you plot this longitudinally, again, that was the original data, and this is the one that we've had since then. We've had this increase in deaths, and if you do an exponential smoothing model, which sounds very, I mean, you're a group of mathematicians, but essentially you look at what's happened previously and forecast what's going forward. What we've seen at first is this transient spike in deaths which go above what could have been expected. And then mathematically, yes, what we end up with is this sort of return to what could have been anticipated, this higher baseline in deaths following methadone use. But I don't think we can just sit here and say, oh, it's what was mathematically expected from the trend that was happening already. These are people's lives. These are people that are dying, and we need to work out how can we change this, how can we actually work on reducing these deaths from happening. So I think there's two things that we can learn from this data. The first is that how can we better provide opioid substitution therapy in an emergency scenario, because that rise above is a big problem. So in future emergencies when they happen, what can we do? And then the second thing is that all because it's within mathematically the bounds of what could be expected, I don't think we should just be complacent about that. We need to think, how can we actually reduce these deaths going forward? Okay, sorry, I get really annoyed sometimes with bad drug policy, but unfortunately it's pretty much the same story. So let's go on to gabapentinoid and opioid co-prescribing. So for those of you that don't know what gabapentin and pregabalin is, I know we don't have lots of, I only do sort of brain up drugs, anything sort of neck down. Statins and cardiovascular things, don't ask me about it. Anyway, for those of you that don't know how these things work, they essentially stop neurotransmission. They stop chemical transmission, so they decrease excitation. They were actually first developed for epilepsy. They're not actually very good anti-epileptics, but they were found whilst they were being developed, they were quite good at neuropathic pain, and now they're also being used for the treatment of anxiety. I don't think they're very good anxiolytics personally, but it's what they're being used for now. Again, this was the data that we had in deaths following gabapentin and pregabalin use that we published a few years ago. And as you might have guessed it with drug-related deaths, if something looks bad, it's actually even worse. And indeed, when we did the reanalysis recently, this trend just carried on. And in the spirit of the symposium, I have added some open prescribing data onto this. And what you can see is that as gabapentin prescriptions have leveled off, so have the deaths following gabapentin use, but the pregabalin ones have just continued. Pregabalin has higher bioavailability and is more efficacious than gabapentin, so it's sought much more for its effects than gabapentin is, so that's why we've got probably more deaths from it there. Now, opioids were co-detected in 93% of these deaths. And there's evidence to suggest that when you take a gabapentin or pregabalin with an opioid, it actually reduces any tolerance to that opioid. And this was actually first discovered, we think, by a group of heroin users in Bristol, because they worked out that if they took one of these substances, they had to take less of their heroin. So it was like a cost-saving activity. But in doing so, you're at risk of accidental overdose, because how much your tolerance is reduced, you don't really know. And that's what we've seen been happening. So it's thought that they do this. The mechanism for all this is not well understood. There are some people doing it that still work with animals. I don't do that anymore. But what's really concerning, well, the whole thing is concerning, but something that's very incredibly concerning is 25% of these deaths have happened when both the gabapentinoid and the opioid was legitimately prescribed to those individuals. These aren't people who have sought the pregabalin by the GP or an opioid and then got something else off the street. They have been given these legitimately and taken them, and then they've died. So this is a big problem. A couple of years ago, I gave 2 years' worth of data to the Home Office, and they were primarily interested in deaths following nitazene use from it. And they actually came back to me and went, Caroline, we think something's wrong with your coding, because there's lots of deaths with pregabalin. Like, you think you've made a mistake. And I just looked at them and went, no, that's the number of deaths that have happened. And so since giving them that data, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs have been commissioned to look again at deaths and wider harms as well of pregabalin and gabapentin. I should probably mention that they were actually scheduled in 2019 to Class C substances, and we can see that there's been a massive effect of a reduction in deaths that's happened there. So again, we need something more transformative than just making these substances more controlled and more illegal, because that's just not working. I will point out, I am on the ACMD now, the views are my own, but I did email my boss this morning to say, Oromorph, Schedule 5? So we should maybe be working on that soon. Okay, so that's the NP sum. If anyone's here who's interested in this data, please let me know. If there's anyone who's here who could help me build one of these wonderful dashboards that you guys have to make this data more freely available, please come and talk to me. And that's it. Thank you for listening.